I watched my children raise glasses over the house they said they had already won, not knowing the deed had been quietly moved into a trust that named the woman they swore to destroy. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I am 70 years old. My name is Paul, and I am a grandfather of 3 boys with scabbed knees and opinions too big for their years. I used to teach shop class, before the district trimmed programs, and I settled into repairing everything with a motor in our little town. My wife, Evelyn, died 12 summers ago. I could tell you 100 small stories about her. I could fill a week with the sound of her laugh. Instead, I will tell you this one, the story of how the people I raised tried to bury me alive in paper, and how I climbed out with a pen. After Evelyn died, I kept the house the way she liked it. Sunroom curtains washed the first week of May. The rose bushes pruned the day after Memorial Day. Do not think that grief makes a man dull. Grief sharpens him, if he loves right. My oldest, Mark, would say, "Dad, sell the place. Move to a condo where you do not have to mow." He meant well, at first. He had always meant well, at first. My daughter, Julia, would bring me soups and say nothing about the dust on the mantel. My youngest, Thomas, would mow the yard with headphones in and hug me hard on the way out. If you asked me then which one would betray me for the price of a kitchen, I would have started to answer and then stopped myself. No father wants to predict that kind of weather. But people change when they think they are near the captain's wheel. Do not ask me why. Power is a different kind of wind. The inheritance conversation started not long after my cardiologist told me my heart wanted me to behave. It was not a precise conversation. It was a shape. Mark's wife, Helena, gave it words at Thanksgiving when the smoked turkey had thunked on the table and the cousins were arguing over crispy skin. "Dad," she said, fork poised like a conductor's baton, "have you thought about updating your will? It has been, what, more than a decade since Mom passed. Laws change. Families grow." She said, "Laws change," as if she were commenting on the weather, and she said, "Families grow," like a midwife. Helena worked in real estate and posted photos of renovated kitchens she did not own. When she smiled, her eyes did too, but not at the same time. She was good with people because she studied them like a puzzle she already knew how to solve. I did not dislike Helena. I do not dislike tools. I just like to know where they are and who is holding them. "We can talk about it," I said, and spooned gravy. Julia tapped her glass with the back of her fork. "I do not want to be crude," she said, "but this is the right moment. We are together. We are not in a crisis." Thomas stared at his plate, then at me. He shook his head once, a small motion that said he did not want to have this conversation over cranberry sauce. He has never liked conflict. He works as a nurse in the cardiac unit and can lift twice his weight in guilt. "What is there to talk about?" I said. "You 3 will split what I leave. The house goes to all of you." Helena said, "That works if everyone can agree," which is another way to say, "that will not work." "Maybe the house should go to the person who can handle the taxes and upkeep," Mark said, as if Helena had thrown him a line. "That is not Julia or Tom. No offense," he added, as if it were seasoning. Thomas pushed away from the table with a scrape. "I am going to check on the boys." I watched his shoulders go out the doorway. Julia's spoon clinked back into her glass. "I am not in a place to take on more. Allison and I are," she hesitated, brave enough to say her wife's name even though she knew Helena would pretend not to hear it, "still paying off the adoption lawyers. A third would be enough. We do not need to fight. That is right, Helena said. No one wants a fight. That was the first time I noticed the way Helena said "we" when she meant Mark, and how often she would reach over to touch his wrist when I spoke, as if translating. They had trouble then, I suspect. A mortgage that pressed into their sleep. Deals that fell through. A notch too much wine on weeknights. If I sound like I am excusing what came next, stop me. I do not excuse. I understand, which is a different tool. Christmas passed. January took a thin bite of us all and left salt on the wind. In February, Mark brought me a folder. I found a great elder law attorney, he said. He is on our side. Really thorough. He wants to make sure everything is protected. He suggested we set up a family council. Regular meetings. Transparency. So we do not land in court. Transparency, I said, and squinted at the folder the way you squint at a leak in the ceiling. It was too neat. It did not smell like my family. The attorney, a man named Brett Johnson with hair so carefully messy it was ornate, came to the house with a briefcase and a smile practiced in expensive reflective surfaces. He looked around at the wedding photos on the mantel and said, "Your late wife had beautiful taste." She did, I said. He prodded my mind the way a doctor prods your abdomen to see where the pain is. Did I pay my own bills? Could I name the president and the date? Did I understand the difference between a will and a trust? I answered calmly and correctly. I made coffee in the 4-cup percolator and set out a plate of the peanut butter cookies my neighbor Marisol drops off when she thinks I have forgotten what treats taste like. Brett passed on the cookies. He drank the coffee and made faces when he thought I was not looking. He wanted me in his office, with his printer, and a notary he kept on a leash. He had brought along a paralegal named Dean who said nothing and gave me the unsettling impression that he had slept in a car. After they left, Mark lingered. "Dad, this is easy. We put the house into a family trust. I chair it, because someone has to. We make sure your late life care is covered, and we give Tom and Julia a clean slice so they cannot fight with us later." "Us," I said. "You and the attorney." "Me and Helena." "The attorney is a tool, Dad." I nodded. I admired his honesty with that one word. He had not realized what he had admitted. That night I took out a yellow legal pad and drew 3 boxes. One said house. One said accounts. One said everything else. Then I wrote 3 names under each and circled them. The names were not the ones you think, if you think this story runs a single straight rail. I wrote my name under house. I wrote a name that was not any of my children under accounts. Under everything else, I wrote surprises. I am not clever with puzzles, but I know my way around a bolt that will not budge. You give it time. You warm it gently. You do not yank until you feel it move. If it does not, you find a different angle. I did not call Brett Johnson back. I went to see my neighbor 2 doors down, who teaches at the community college and has a wife who does estate law for people who cannot afford estate law. Her name is Nora, and she wears her hair in a bun that says she is not here for trouble. When I told her what I suspected, she pursed her lips. "Helena," she said. "She has a nice Instagram. She has an agenda." "Most people do," Nora said. "So do not bring me feelings. Bring me paper." I did. I brought her tax returns, the mortgage deed, the old will, insurance policy statements, and a code to the lockbox at the bank. She read faster than I could pour coffee and scribbled notes. Finally she tapped the old will with her pen. You have a standard split, she said. The problem is not the will. The problem is the people who think they can outmaneuver it with a family trust chaired by your son. A trust is a tool. Sometimes it is a crowbar. Sometimes it is a hammer. With the wrong hands, it is both. I do not want to split the three of them, I said. But I do not want to be moved like furniture. I will draft a revocable trust that answers to you and you alone, Nora said. We will move the house into it. We will quietly appoint a successor trustee you trust, one your kids will hate. Someone who will not be intimidated. You can change it while you are alive. You can revoke it. You can set traps. Traps. I repeated, and something in me that had been waiting since Thanksgiving sat up. Perfectly legal ones for people who try to force your hand, she said, and smiled for the first time. Also, your daughter-in-law is dabbling in unauthorized practice of law. We can make sure she stops. We moved the house into the trust in March. The trust was named Widower's Son Trust, a joke Nora insisted on to make me less afraid of paperwork. The successor trustee was my sister-in-law, Evelyn's younger sister, Ruth. Ruth lives 3 towns over. She and Helena took a polite dislike to each other 8 years ago over a Christmas ham that Ruth said was overcooked and Helena said was rustic. They wear their civility like starched collars. Ruth is a retired school principal who once removed a school board member from a meeting by announcing that he was disrupting learning and then waiting while he figured out how to disagree politely. I have never seen anyone argue with her twice. Are you sure? Nora asked me gently. She is not your child. Evelyn would have chosen her for anything that mattered, I said. That is enough. Nora nodded and slid the documents across the desk. Sign here, initial here, and we will file this where it is hard to find unless you know where to look. We did not tell anyone. Silence is a kind of power. Mark and Helena pressed for meetings. They sent me a calendar invite labeled, Paul Legacy Council, with a cheerful emoji that I refused to learn the meaning of. They added Julia and Thomas. The agenda had bullet points. Helen wrote low-hanging fruit twice, which is how you know a person has a hammer and is looking for nails. The first meeting was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon in April. They arrived early, because people do when they plan to take something they have not yet been given. Helena handed out colored folders. Mark poured the wine. Julia set a glass down in front of me and said quietly, "You do not have to drink it." "I can pretend," I said, "and then pour it into the fern." I did neither. Helena stood up at the head of my own dining table. I watched the room like a mechanic who knows a bad sound is coming. "So," she began brightly, "we want to formalize the transition. We have spoken with an attorney who specializes in this. He says a family trust is the smoothest vehicle." "Which attorney?" Julia asked. "You met him at Christmas," Helena said, as if that mattered. "Brett Johnson. He has done a lot of work with families like ours." "Families like ours," Thomas said. He had not taken a folder. He was holding his son's baseball hat and turning it in his hands like a wheel he was deciding whether to abandon. In the middle of this stalemate, Mark made his big move. He produced a sheaf of papers and set them in front of me. "I had Brett draft something simple," he said, as if he had brought me a sandwich after a long day. "We just need your signature to move the house into a temporary trust while you recover from your heart surgery this summer." "I am not scheduled for heart surgery," I said. "Did Brett schedule it for me?" Helena laughed, high and quick. "It is a hypothetical, of course," she said. "Families prepare for hypotheticals. That is what families do. Julia said, we prepare for emergencies. We do not create them. Thomas rubbed his jaw. He looked at me. His eyes apologized for the room. I lifted the top sheet. It had the words Temporary Fiduciary Family Trust at the top, as if something so full of lies could be given a soothing name. The signature lines were wide enough to drive a truck through. There was a notary page that had already been stamped. I did not sign this, I said. We expected to do it today, Helena said, with a perfect owner's smile at the mistake, as if someone had mismeasured a quartz countertop and she would forgive them. I held the paper. I thought of the quiet mornings with my coffee and the sound of Evelyn's slippers on tile. I thought of how easily a pen can become a weapon, and how often we forget that until someone uses it on us. And then I remembered Nora saying, we can set traps. Did you bring Brett? I asked. I would like him to explain this to me. Mark's jaw worked. He is not available on Sundays, he said, which told me everything I needed to know. Then bring me Dean, I said, smiling like a man who has seen a rat he knows how to catch. He is the one who forgot to take his notary stamp back to the office. It was a small gamble. It paid. Helen flushed and set her folder down. We are trying to help you, she said. You have made that house a mausoleum. You do not even go into your bedroom. You sleep on the couch. It hurt in the good way, the way a stretch hurts. Do not talk about rooms you have not earned, I said, and watched her blink at the sting. The meeting fell apart after that. Mark left the papers. I did not sign them. I folded them into a large manila envelope Nora had labeled just in case with a smiley face. That is when the escalation began. They moved from kindness to pressure with the smoothness of a car shifting from second to third. Mark called with concern in his voice and, Dad, we need to protect you. Helena texted links to articles about elderly men exploited by new girlfriends, a strange pivot that told me more about her anxieties than mine. Julia withdrew, shamed by conflict. Thomas checked on me nightly. When he did, he took photos of my pill organizer and the refrigerator and sent them to me with time stamps, as if to prove to himself that I was all right. Then one Tuesday in May I came home from the hardware store with a box of screws and found two men in suits in my living room. They were polite. They had clipboards. They told me they were here to conduct a welfare check requested by my family. Welfare check? I said. Concerns about your capacity, said the taller of the two. Is this where I ask if my capacity is to tie a bowline, change a carburetor, or carry a man half my age down the stairs when he faints? I said. They did not laugh. It was not their job. I called Nora. She told me to tell them simple truths. I did. They left with a shrug and apologies. The shorter one had a grandfather who lived alone. He told me to call my son. I told him I would. 2 days later, I received a letter scheduling a competency evaluation. It was written as if I had requested it. It was signed by Brett Johnson. I did not call my son. I called Ruth. Bring your spine, I said. It is time. Ruth arrived like a storm that does not use thunder to announce itself. She wore a navy suit that had been bought for a school board hearing in 1998 and had never lost its purpose. She brought 2 items of power, a folder of documents Nora had prepped, and a casserole, because we do not do battle on empty stomachs. She also brought a phone, which she set face down in the center of the dining table like a small priest. Dean notarized a signature that does not exist, she said after reading the temporary trust. We can use that. And we can use Helena's text messages about hypotheticals. We are not making this criminal, I said, though the desire prickled my skin. Who said anything about criminal? Ruth said. We are making it expensive. There is a difference. The competency evaluation took place in a beige conference room with a plant that had wilted and recovered so many times it had learned to expect resurrection. The evaluator was a woman with half-moon glasses and a sharp pencil. She asked questions. I answered them. She watched my hands when I spoke, as if they might give away my mind. I wrote down a sentence about why I did not want to move to assisted living, because this house smells like my wife when it rains. She blinked. She wrote something down. I read upside down without making it obvious. It said, Oriented X3. Inside intact. After the evaluation, Brett Johnson strutted into the room like a man who owned the lighting. He shook my hand and squeezed like a bridge salesman. He shook Ruth's hand and squeezed less successfully. We are all here for Paul, he said, as if reciting. We want what is best for him. What is best for him, Ruth said, is the truth. He has already established a trust. It is revocable and private. The house has been moved. He is not required to disclose it to you. Brett's eyebrows tried to escape his face. Excuse me. You do not hold his hand, Ruth said calmly. You do not hold his pen. Brett looked at me then, as if I had conspired to grow a spine when he was not looking. The thing about certain men is they only believe in power on and power off. They do not believe in power quietly redirected. Your children are concerned, Brett said. They can be concerned in my living room without your mouth, I said. This is your notice. You are not my attorney. You will not interact with me again. Ruth slid a letter across the table. He is revoking any implied authority from you or your firm, she said. Do not contact him or his children regarding his estate. All communications go through me. You are also on notice regarding your paralegal's notarial misconduct. This is ridiculous, Brett muttered. And expensive, Ruth added, and for the first time I saw Brett's jaw tighten the way Mark's did when something he meant to control slipped. After that meeting, the quiet turned mean. Helena stopped pretending. She wrote Julia a long message about how women who marry women do not understand what it takes to build a real family legacy. Julia sent me the screenshot, hands shaking so hard the text was blurry. I never wanted the house, she said. I just wanted us. Mark stopped calling me Dad and began calling me Paul in a certain tone that men use when they are testing whether they will still get their way. He sent me a spreadsheet titled, Projected Maintenance Costs Over 10 Years. It included things like new windows, with a price that made me laugh, and professional rosebush pruning, as if I had forgotten how to hold shears. Thomas started sleeping on my couch on nights he was not at the hospital. They will not try anything in person if I am here, he said, and then carefully did not add, but they might otherwise. He was right. They did otherwise. In early June, my bank called to ask whether I had authorized a transfer from one of my accounts into a new account titled Temporary Fiduciary Family Trust. I had not. The bank froze the money and asked me to come in with identification. I went. Nora met me there. We signed forms. Ruth called someone who owed her a favor. The manager handled it quietly. Later that night, when the fear had drained enough for me to speak without shaking, I sat at the kitchen table with Thomas. Your brother is doing this, I said. Helena is, Thomas said, and then closed his eyes. No. That is not fair. He is too. You do not have to take sides. I already have a side, he said. It is the one that does not take a house from a man who is still living in it. It was then I decided to bury them in paper, the way they had planned to bury me. I went back to Nora and Ruth. We prepared a codicil to my old will that changed nothing important but looked important enough to draw fire. We prepared a separate letter of intent, handwritten in my script, stating that I wished the house to be sold upon my death and the proceeds to be divided in a way that would provoke a reaction, a small extra portion to Julia to compensate for unequal treatment in the past, not because she was a woman married to a woman, but because she had spent more time caregiving when Evelyn was ill. This was a truth. It was not why I wrote it. I wrote it because a certain kind of person hears that and cannot stand to be told that love is work. We filed what needed to be filed and set aside what needed to be found by the right eyes. Then I did two small things on my own. First, I put a camera in the pen cup on the kitchen counter. It faced the spot where guests always put their purses and where Helena would pick up my mail and sort it without being asked. It was the size of a peppermint. It held 6 hours of high-definition proof of the way people behave when they think paper is a shortcut to love. Second, I called someone your family likely has too, the aunt who lives on the other side of the county line and is too loud at funerals. In my case this was Aunt Louise, 80, clear-eyed, and mean to people who deserved it. Come for lunch on Sunday, I said. Bring your silver hair and your opinions. Will there be confrontation? She asked cheerfully. Yes, I said. Then I will bring lemon bars, she said. I chose that Sunday because I knew Mark and Helena would come. I had accepted a council meeting for that afternoon with the note, we can discuss what I have decided. Those words bring certain people like moths. They cannot help themselves. They arrived late, which is the same thing as arriving early if your job is to test boundaries. Helena set her bag on the counter. Mark hugged me with a stiff back. Julia came in quietly, Allison behind her with a plate of deviled eggs and a face full of apology for a sin she had not committed. Thomas, who had been out on a double shift, slid in with his hair damp and his eyes soft. Aunt Louise was already in the dining room, rearranging chairs like a general. Family, I said, standing at the head of the table, thank you for making time to decide how to share the things you think are yours. Helena laughed, that same high note. Oh, Dad, she said. Let us keep it light. I set down a folder and opened it. Inside were copies of the codicil, the letter of intent, and a list of items labeled gifts I will give while I am not dead. The list included the old boat motor that no one could fix but me, the brass ship's bell my father stole from a yard sale with permission, and the recipe book Evelyn had written in fountain pen. I want to give these now, I said. Not later. You cannot just give things away, Mark said, which is a nice summary of what happens to a person who thinks things are love. Watch me, I said. They argued. They accused. Helena called me stubborn. Mark called me irrational. Julia cried, then apologized to the rug for catching her tears. Thomas stood behind my chair and said nothing. And here is the hinge. Helena stepped away to the kitchen, the way she always did when she wanted to send a message out of earshot. She rifled through her bag for her phone. She picked up my mail and slid the envelopes around. She removed a letter addressed to me from the bank. She slid it into her bag. She returned to the table with a smile that says, I have a secret you will hate. The camera saw this. It saw more in the next minutes, when Mark followed her, and she pulled the bank letter from her bag to show him. It saw him reach for it. It saw her put it back. It heard her say, "We will open it later. Do not give him a scene." I could have confronted them then. I did not. I let the paper stack. 2 days later, a process server arrived at my door with a petition. Mark and Helena had filed for temporary guardianship, citing my decline. The petition included a screenshot of my letter of intent with certain words highlighted as if they were evidence of confusion. They had also filed a request for an emergency injunction to prevent me from dissipating assets. It was signed by Brett Johnson. I sat at the kitchen table with the paper and let anger move through me like a storm that cleans everything it passes. Ruth handled the legal reply. Nora crafted a response that might as well have been a violin sonata for how beautifully it cut. We filed a counter-petition for sanctions, attaching the pen camera footage. We requested attorney's fees. We alerted the bank to the intercepted mail. We asked the evaluator for her report, which quietly destroyed their argument. We did not accuse my son of being a bad man. We accused his wife of unauthorized practice of law and his attorney of letting her. We named people who could not shrug off the cost of embarrassment. The hearing took place on a wet Monday in July in a courtroom where the air conditioning was too enthusiastic and the clock ticked like a metronome scolding a novice. The judge was an older woman with hair the color of winter fields. She looked at me. She looked at my children. She looked at Helena. She looked, finally, at Brett. When she spoke, her voice hewed oak. "Counsel," she said, "why am I looking at a petition for guardianship for a man who is oriented, who has executed estate planning with independent counsel, and who writes clearer sentences than my clerks?" Brett launched into a speech about concern. He inserted words like transition. He made Helena sound like a saint and Mark like a man carrying an invisible cross. The judge's mouth tightened. She turned to Ruth. "Respondent?" she asked. Ruth stood, and the room stood with her. "Your Honor," she said, "my brother-in-law's son and daughter-in-law attempted to alter his estate behind his back, to insert themselves into control of his home, and to interfere with his banking. When he refused, they escalated. They filed this petition to force him into a guardianship he does not need. They also intercepted his mail. We have video. We have dates. We have the names of witnesses. We would like to see the video," the judge said. We saw the video. There is something ugly about seeing a person's secret on a big screen. There is something cleansing about it too, if the truth is the thing that embarrasses them. Helena did not look at the screen. She looked at her manicure. Mark watched the video like a man watching a stranger. He stood very straight. He did not blink much. Julia bowed her head. Thomas's hands clenched and unclenched around a folded paper so carefully that it did not tear. When it was over, the judge took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "Counsel," she said to Brett, "you will explain to me the basis for your notary's seal on a signature that was not executed in his presence. Do not say hypotheticals." Brett stammered. He tried to make Dean into a villain. The judge was not interested in a scapegoat. "Injunction denied," she said. Petition for temporary guardianship dismissed with prejudice. Sanctions hearing set for 2 weeks from today, at which time I will consider an order for attorney's fees to be paid by petitioners and their counsel. Helena sucked in a small breath. Mark looked at the table. Julia reached for Allison's hand. Thomas exhaled so slowly you could have measured it with a ruler. We left the courthouse into a strip of sun between clouds. I felt something I had not felt since Evelyn's memorial reception, when someone told me a story about her I had never heard, and for a moment she stood beside me again in the telling. The feeling was relief braided with grief, braided with a kind of pride that is not arrogant, only grateful. I had kept what was mine. I had not become a man who returns cruelty with cruelty and calls it justice. Not yet. The sanctions hearing was set. In the days between, Helena tried to mend without admitting she had broken anything. She rang my doorbell and brought a basket of muffins as if sugar were a solvent for betrayal. She stood on my porch and cried, and if I tell you it did not touch me, I am lying. I am a father. I am a fool for tears, especially those of my children's partners, who are half my children in the way that matters. But I did not invite her inside. You cannot write a hinge into a door that is not on your house. The night before the hearing, Mark called. It was almost midnight. He was not drunk. He was worse. He was clear. Dad, he said, we can stop this. We can tell the judge it was a misunderstanding. We can move forward. We can do this as a family. As a family, I repeated. I was trying to help, he said. You are old. You do not see it. You live like Mom is in the next room. Sometimes she is, I said, and he made a sound as if I had kicked him. She is dead, he said, soft and incredulous, and for a moment my son was 5 again, wanting me to fix a thing that no one could fix. Yes, I said. She is dead. That is why I am careful about what is alive. Including me. You do not have to punish me, he said. I am not, I said. That is tomorrow. I hung up. Do not judge me. Or do. I have earned it. Revenge was not what I had aimed for when I first saw Helena move my mail. Revenge is only useful when it is also a mirror. The hearing would be the mirror. We went back to court. The judge arrived 15 minutes late, which is how you know she wanted to make sure we were not late. Brett was pale. Helena had a bruise blooming under her eyes, pride where sleep should be. Mark wore a tie that did not go with his suit. Ruth looked like a statue of a saint in an older church whom no one could afford to move, and Nora looked like she was calculating billable hours in her head and enjoying it. The judge called the case. She had read our brief. She had read theirs. She had read the evaluator's report. She did not look amused. I am awarding attorney's fees to respondent, she said, meaning me, to be paid personally by petitioners and by their counsel, jointly and severally. She looked at Brett as if she were measuring him for something he would not like. Additionally, I am referring the notary misconduct to the state board. I am ordering petitioners to refrain from contacting respondent regarding his estate plan. Any further attempts to interfere will result in contempt. Helena swallowed a sob. Mark nodded stiffly, that nod you give when you realize the thing you have broken has cut you back. Julia squeezed Allison's hand so hard that Allison winced and then smiled. Thomas stared at the table, shoulders shaking once. We went home. We ate the leftover casserole. We watched a baseball game without seeing it. We looked at each other like people who have survived a fire quietly and are not sure whether to laugh or hose each other down anyway. The boys came by and asked if we could take the canoe out when the weather was right. Life came back like rain after a stubborn drought. This is where the story might have ended if I were a better man. I would let the legal outcome teach the lesson. I would forgive my son and his wife, and we would mend. But I am not a saint. I am a man who watched someone he loves plot to move him like a chair. The trust gave me one more tool. Remember the letter of intent that gave Julia a small extra share from the sale of the house when I die? It was bait. The trust itself held the deed, and the trust's instructions were my real intentions. They had two parts. The first said that upon my death, the house would be sold and the proceeds distributed equally after paying a fixed sum to a nursing scholarship at the hospital where Thomas works. The second part was a clause that activated if any beneficiary had, during my life, attempted to exert undue influence over my estate. The clause was simple: those who had tried to take would take less. A lot less. The difference would be diverted not to the others, because I did not want to make my children fight over my revenge, but to the scholarship and to a fund administered by Ruth that would buy musical instruments for children who could not afford them. It would also make a public notice in the paper when it happened, not naming the person, only a line Evelyn would have loved: in honor of those who tried to take, we give. Are you sure? Nora asked me, back when we drafted it. No one will see it until it matters, I said. And those who need to see it will not care why. At the hearing's end, when Mark and Helena left in their separate car silence, I went home and executed the final piece. I wrote a letter. It was not a legal document. It was a father's document. I told my children what I had done and why. I told them the scholarship would be named after our family but not after me. I told them the fund for instruments would be called Evelyn's Music Room because she had wanted to learn the piano her whole life and had loved children who did not know how to sit still when the first notes began. I told them I knew about the attempt to move the house and the bank letter and the fake trust, and that while I would always love them, I could not, as a man with a spine, pretend they had not tried to put me in a box before I was dead. Julia came the next day. She cried on the porch and told me she did not want more money. She wanted less blame. I told her she did not have it. She laughed and corrected my grammar and told me Allison thought I was the bravest man she knew and to please stop doing things that made me brave. We hugged. We ate toast. I gave her the recipe book. Thomas came after his shift and fell asleep in the armchair like a dog who has finally found the right rug. He woke up with creases on his face and said, "You are all right." And I said, "Yes," and he said, "Good," and then he cried like the kind of man I hope my grandsons become. Mark did not come for a week. When he did not bring Helena. He stood on my porch a long time before knocking. When I opened the door, he looked older by a decade. He did not sit. He moved to the mantel and touched his mother's photo. He looked at the rosebushes through the window. He turned the ship's bell with his fingers, a small ritual he had done as a boy every time he thought he could ring it and I would not hear. "Dad," he said, "I am sorry. I do not expect forgiveness. I expect whatever you are going to do." "You have it," I said. "The whatever. Not the forgiveness. That will take time." He nodded. "She wanted the house," he said, and then bit his lip. "That is not fair. I wanted it too. I wanted to fix things by controlling them." "That is what we do when we are afraid," I said. "We hold the world down and call it love." "Is the clause real?" he asked, a thin laugh behind the words. "The one about taking less?" "It is," I said. "But you are not there yet, and I am not dead." He nodded again, a small mercy, and then left. That night, Helena sent me a message I did not expect. It was 3 sentences. The first apologized without saying the word. The second blamed stress without using that ugly rope. The third said, I was a poor girl who thought scraping would keep her alive. I forgot what was not mine. I did not reply. Some words are stones you must set down alone. Some are deepened. My cardiologist told me my heart had behaved beautifully, as if it had witnessed courtrooms and decided to mind itself. The boys came over to build a ramp for the canoe, and we went out on the lake and they argued about who got to paddle. We passed a house with a blue door. I saw a woman on the porch who looked like Evelyn from a distance if you blur your eyes and forget time. I waved out of habit. She waved back because kindness is contagious among the old. By September, a quiet had settled. It was the kind of quiet you get after a storm. There are branches to clear. There are roofs to inspect. There is, probably, more weather coming. But you can hear the birds again, and they were there the whole time. That is the point, I think. We are so busy arguing over future furniture that we do not hear the birds who are singing simply because it is morning, and so are we. On the first day of school, Ruth called me. "I am bored," she said. "No one is misbehaving, and the judge has stopped calling for updates, and I am itching to keep your enemies nervous." "You sound like a principal who misses expelling children," I said. "Exactly," she said. "Put me to use." I laughed. "Do you need more people to frighten?" "No," she said. "I need to remind you to write the scholarship check now, not later. I want to see Thomas's name on a plaque while I am alive." She was right. We went to the hospital together. We handed a check to a woman who cried because people do not give unless you ask, and we had asked ourselves. We wrote a story about why on a small card. It did not mention revenge. It mentioned Evelyn and old songs. It mentioned young nurses and the way their hands still believe. It mentioned Mark and Julia and Thomas without saying what we had survived. We took a photo next to a blank wall where a plaque would live. Ruth smiled like a person who had found religion again and realized it had correctly spelled her name. The plaque went up a month later. Thomas took a photo and sent it to us. Then he sent another one, the boys pretending to read the plaque with exaggerated seriousness. Then another, Allison and Julia holding hands in front of it and smiling so hard their eyes vanished. I printed the photos and put them on the mantel. I left a space between them for Mark and Helena, not because I expected it, but because space is cheaper than regret. In November, I invited everyone for an early Thanksgiving. There would be one condition, I wrote in the message. No talk of papers. No talk of the house. No talk of money. If someone violated the rule, they would do the dishes. That is how you keep the stakes low enough to leave a mark without drawing blood. They came. They ate. They laughed, tentatively at first and then greedily. Helena brought a salad with ribbons of fennel so thin they trembled, a thing of beauty that tastes like apology. Mark carved the turkey and handed me the wishbone like a man who remembered how to be led. Julia toasted to small mercies. Thomas drank a beer on the porch and breathed. After the plates were cleared, I asked the boys to take the old ship's bell outside and ring it. They did, so many times the neighbors came out and clapped because joy is a kind of noise. The sound echoed over the lake, up the street, into the places where we had almost broken and then did not. I stood with my hand on the porch railing and felt the vibration. It felt like love you can hear with your bones. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in the living room with the plate of cookies Aunt Louise had slipped into my hands with a wink. I turned on the lamp my wife had found at a yard sale, the one with a scratch on the base that makes the light look warmer than it is. I picked up my pen and wrote a new letter of intent, not for the court or my children, but for myself. I wrote, I am still here. I have a house and a heart. I have a trust and a sister-in-law who does not let people make mistakes twice. I have a son who almost lost himself and did not. I have a daughter who carries more weight than she admits and a daughter-in-law who comes at the world sharp and might someday blunt herself enough to be kind on purpose. I have a son who watches my breathing when I sleep and pretends he does not. I have boys in a canoe who argue because it is easier than loving directly. I wrote, their inheritance is not the house. It is this. It is how you do not let people file you away. It is how you put rope around what you love and invite people to hold it with you, not pull. It is how, if they try to pull, you let the rope burn their hands long enough to teach, not long enough to scar. Finally, because I am a man and not a saint, I wrote, if they try this again, I will sell the house out from under them while I am still alive and endow a music room with a grand piano and a time slot on Saturday mornings named after the woman they swore to destroy. I put down the pen. I went to bed. I slept in the bedroom for the first time since Evelyn died. The window was open. The air smelled like roses and something else I could not name. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe victory. Maybe both. In the morning I woke and made coffee and watched the sun crawl across the kitchen floor like a cat finding its favorite place. I looked at the table where Helena had set her bag and the camera had watched and Ruth had stacked paper that gleamed like knives. I looked at the door where my son had stood and apologized without asking me to make it cheap. I looked at the mantel where my wife's photo glowed in the early light. Then I went outside. I bent down to the rosebush. I pruned the dead heads gently. It is a small act, pruning. It looks like cutting but it is making room. When I finished, I rang the ship's bell once so the sound would roll down the street to the house where a woman I did not know would hear it and smile and maybe not know why. The boys would come over after school. We would go to the lake. We would not talk about paper. We would hold the canoe between us and lift. We would do the thing family is meant to do, which is not to own each other, but to carry. I did not break them. I let them trip on the steps they built for me and catch themselves on a railing my wife gave me the day we married, invisible and sturdy. Do not let go of who you are. Hold fast when the wind tells you to. Teach with consequences, not with cruelty. Ring the bell when it is time. And if they try again, make the music louder.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.